So Jerry DeWitt was a successful Pentecostal minister in the Deep South until 2011. After a long and intense soul searching, he came to the conclusion that there simply is no God. When he was outed as an atheist, he lost his secular job, his friends, and his family relationships. He was ostracized by the Christian community of his small town, but then he established his own atheist church, which is growing. He is here today to talk about his personal experience in strengthening the atheist community, so please join me in welcoming Jerry DeWitt.
Thank you. I think I've got it on. Does it sound right? Yeah, I can hear it now. Thanks. Well, I don't know who that long-haired hippie is. I love that hair. I had to cut it, and I was very disappointed whenever I had to cut it. How many people already know my story? Most of you. All right, well, so off to the beer. Job well done already. So, 1986, I was saved at Jimmy Swaggart church. Yeah, I know, off to a great start. By 1988, I graduated, and I was already making my way as an evangelist. By 1990, I was married. By 1992, our one and only son was born. And then you skip all the way to 2011. 2011, in the month of April, unbeknownst to me, I stood behind the pulpit of my wife's cousin's church in Cut and Shoot, Texas. It's a great Texas name, right? Cut and Shoot, Texas. And I was struggling in every way that not just a speaker struggles, but I was struggling in every way that a human being struggles in order to come to grips with the changes that they can perceive are on the horizon. I stood in that pulpit and I looked out over the small congregation of this little new and fledgling home missions church that my wife's cousin was known for building. As wonderful as he was to us, he was a horrible pastor. And he would use his evangelistic skills the first 6 months to build up a congregation, and then in the next 6 months he would tear it all apart and have to go somewhere else because he just wasn't very good at pastoring. But I was great at pastoring. I loved people. Absolutely loved people. And my expression of that love, my sense of humanism, my ability to be a part of a community was best and at that time only expressed through the ministry. Whenever you would call me pastor, it was the equivalent of calling me by my given name. Because that was my identity. That's who I was. That's what I did. That was the reason that I was on planet Earth. That's what made everything make sense. That's what made not just the ups, but also the downs in life make sense. Every time that we struggled financially, it was for the greater cause. Every time that I would grieve that I was not spending the time with my family that I wanted to spend, it wasn't just that I was working overtime at the plant in order to pay the bills. Not that that's not honorable, but in my world, it was more than that. It was that I was spending that extra time. I was making that sacrifice, many times making that sacrifice on behalf of my family in order to save a soul, in order to save the world, in order to change the future, in order to make things better, in order to be part of the community, in order to be part of the ministry. As I stood behind that pulpit and I struggled for the words and I had this sense that there was something that I could still contribute, even though when I looked out in the congregation, they were all wearing their costumes. They were Pentecostals, and they were all dressed as they were supposed to dress. The women, as our women did, had long hair. They were not allowed to cut their hair. The men did not have facial hair. They were not allowed to have facial hair. They all had on their long sleeves. All the women were wearing dresses. No one was wearing shorts. I knew that more than likely if I followed them home, there would be no television sets on the weekends. They would not go see a secular movie. They would not be listening to secular music. They would not be reading anything that was not religious. Their entire life was wrapped up within that bubble. And whenever I stood there behind that pulpit, sensing what was changing in me and the benefit that I was receiving from that change, as premature and immature as that change was, I wanted to set them free from that bubble. And I thought somehow, after all these years of experience, I can find the words to try to set them free and bring them to where I'm at. Can I get a Darwin? But I couldn't. Somehow, with all of the experience from 1986, and in particular 1987, when I was 17 years old and already in the ministry, I started off each school morning of high school, or at least of the senior year of high school, rushing down the hallway of this little little high school in Rose Pine, Louisiana. My graduating class, only 55 people, right? Some of you carpool with more people than that. I would rush to the Civics and Free Enterprise classroom that was steered by D.A. Keel, a wonderful, beautiful person who had recently gotten the Holy Ghost. Anybody know that language at all? Am I really by myself? Okay, good. Whew. He had gotten saved. He had gotten the Holy Ghost, and he was attending Three Pine United Pentecostal Church, and he was excited. He was so excited that prior to starting each school day, he would turn his classroom into a sanctuary. And I'm Jerry Wayne, and my cousin, Gary Wayne, a lot of imagination in Rose Pine. He was also called to the ministry, and we would share the pulpit, share the little stand in the Civics and Free Enterprise class before school would start, and we trained how to preach. And one of our techniques was that, and Gary thought of this because something was terribly wrong with Gary, but he thought of this. He said, from now on, let's stop preparing the night before for our messages, but instead, let's not prepare, let's just pray. And anybody who spent any time praying, you know what kind of fun that is, right? It's equivalent to sitting in the waiting room at the hospital for somebody you don't even care about. You know, it's like. But he said, instead, let's pray, and the next morning what we'll do is we'll get up there, we'll stand behind the podium, and we'll just let someone in the classroom, you hear what I'm telling you, right? Someone in the classroom at the school. Everybody getting this picture, all right? We'll let someone in the classroom just open their Bible. They can flip the pages to whatever just opens up, whatever verse they point their finger to, that's what we'll preach from. Good training, right? That's how I started. So in 2011, after 25 years of being in the ministry, after 25 years of being a pastor, after 25 years of being God's spokesperson, after 25 years of being a public speaker, I really thought that I could figure out how to stand in front of that audience and be worlds apart in our theology and in our worldview and still approach them, still grab a hold of them and pull them over to where I was at. But as I drove back to Louisiana, I had to admit it wasn't working. And little did I know that April, on that Sunday afternoon, that would be the last Christian message that I would preach. Who's read or listened to the book? Anybody? Hope After Faith, my book? A few of you. What is the wrong with the rest of you? No. And as I detail in the book, I went through a great moment of crisis. We can talk about it in the Q&A in just a little bit, but I went through a great moment of crisis. And when I came out on the other side of that, immediately I reached out for help, and immediately I was embraced by the secular community, and in particular that was embodied by Dan Barker, and Dan Barker connected me to the Clergy Project. So all of a sudden my life had flipped on a switch. April was my last Christian message. By May, I was in the Clergy Project and was beginning to get myself freer and freer from the ministry. I'd already stopped pastoring, but I was still getting called upon on a regular basis because it was 25 years of connections and 25 years of churches. And so I was taking fewer and fewer of these opportunities. And then all of a sudden, after making these connections through the Clergy Project and after meeting these beautiful people like Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor, I get a call from Dan Barker. Hey, I want you to be on our radio program. I want you to tell your story. I didn't want to tell my story. I didn't want anybody to know my story. but I loved Dan. And what's amazing to me is the only reason that I got saved at Jimmy Swaggart church was because the lady who invited me to go, I loved her so much I couldn't tell her no. The only reason that you know my name today is because the guy that wanted me to be on that radio program, I loved so much I couldn't tell him no. So remember this, kids. This is what kind of trouble you get into when you can't say no. So I said yes. And he said, you know, it's going to be great. We'll take care of it. It's all going to work out. And we scheduled the date. The night before the event, I laid down in the bed, my wife quickly going to sleep. All the lights are out in the house. There's the glow of the alarm clock. And I'm so still. I'm not just so still physically, but I'm so still emotionally because I'm somewhat numb. And I'm somewhat paralyzed. Not just from what has already happened, but from what I was afraid was about to happen next. Because I was about to go on a radio show that is also a podcast, that is also archived on this little thing you may have heard of called the intranet. And I knew that once I did that, there was no going back. There was no way to come back. And I laid there in that bed, and it felt like my heart was pounding so hard that it was bouncing the mattress. I was horrified. I trembled. I shook. And it felt like it went on for days, but I'm sure it was only minutes that eventually developed into hours. But as I laid there thinking about what I was about to do, and then I began to question, why am I so afraid? What is it that I'm so afraid of? My entire life crystallized into one understanding. One, pardon the language, epiphany about me. Suddenly, this trauma, this life situation, this drama that had developed in many cases without my choosing, without my ability to predict where it was going to go or why it would expand the way that it had, this situation had now focused a spotlight on my inner character in a way that probably nothing else could have, and definitely in a way that nothing had done so before. And I said, why are you so afraid of this? And a little bitty child inside my psyche stepped up and said, I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid that it's going to make them mad. I'm afraid they're not going to love me anymore. I'm afraid I'm going to be abandoned. And it shouldn't have been a big surprise. It shouldn't have been something that should have surprised me because I was not only a people pleaser, I was literally a professional people pleaser. Right? It's what many times ministers are, with the best intentions. But hearing that echo inside me with such clarity that this was all about rejection, that the only reason I wouldn't step forward would be because of rejection, I couldn't help but think about all the times that I'd accepted all the crazy-ass people in my life. Right? Countless encounters in countless churches where people just decided, bless God, they're going to be who they are, and you can like it or not like it. I'll find another church next Sunday. And I would just love them, and I would just accept them, right? Relatives that felt like blood was some type of contract, and you had to put up with their crap regardless, right? People who took pride in their ability to always be the same. Don't you love people who tell you, I'm always the same? Yep. An ass. Over here, over there, last week, next week, yes, always the same. Right? Well, that wasn't me. I was horrified of rejection. I realized I was horrified to be alone. I was horrified not to be part of that community. But then I thought, but I've accepted all these people, so surely there'll be some payback. Surely they'll accept me. Where were y'all at to give advice back then? And then the last little piece of this was, don't I deserve to give myself the same respect and the same loving embrace of who I am? Don't I deserve to give that to myself the same way I had given it to so many other people in my life? And I would love to tell you that the fear just melted away and that I've been brave and tall, dark, and handsome ever since. I tell that joke every time, and everybody always laughs. But that's not true. I was still afraid, but I pushed through. And it forced me the next day before the interview to break this thing down, to somehow boil it down to what it was and what had happened, and to chronologically lay it out piece by piece by piece, and to have an explanation, because I thought that's what you do on interviews, right? But that's not what you do. You just play off of the host and you do whatever they do. But that preparation for that one interview became the book, Hope After Faith. And it became the story that I've now told for the last 3 years. And it became a lighthouse, a beacon to people that didn't really know, was it possible to make such a change, to embrace such a difference, and to stand up whenever it looks as if when you do stand up, your entire world's going to tell you to sit down and reject you. That little book, from that one little interview, from that little moment of crisis, becomes something that helped people. There's a power within the story that you're living out right now. There's a power within the story that is your daily existence, is the trials and tribulations of your life, the way that you're ebbing and flowing through your existence. Right now, it just feels like you're making your way from one event to the next, and you're just trying to survive, and you're just working your situation out with this relative or that loved one, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way to let this person know who I am and what I really believe, and why do I even want to do that? What's motivating me to be this type of person? While you're figuring all of that out, what you may not yet know, that I discovered the hard way, is that you're actually writing your book. And your book becomes a page within the larger book of the community. And some paragraphs within that book talk about when you got saved at Jimmy Swaggart's church. And some talk about whenever you was an evangelist. And some talk about whenever you started doubting. And some talks about the ups and the downs. And some talk about when your house went into foreclosure because your best friend fired you from your non-religious job because the community began to find out about who you were. And some pages detail your wife driving off because the pressure and the scrutiny and the drama was too much. But some pages detail Dan Barker calling you back and connecting you with other beautiful people who have been brave the same way you're trying to be brave. And some pages detail people who don't even know you walking up with a tear in the corner of their eye saying, I just want to give you this. I know you're having a hard time, but I just want to give you a little money, and please call me if you need anything. If you're passing through here, I don't want you to pass through here and have any problems without knowing. You can call me. Strangers. Some of the pages detail you walking into a room and instantly knowing that you connect with almost everyone there because you've all been brave and walked down the same path. What is that shared story? That shared story is community. And how do you build a better community? You just learn how to tell your story better. Thank you. We try to rush through this part so that we can spend as much time as possible doing Q&A, because to me, that's the best part of things. So
I have the Q&A mic. Aha, Carmen. All right, hang on.
Need to know. I need to know.
Jeez.
You haven't shared what actually made you leave the church. How did that come about?
It's in this little book called Hope After Faith for $20. No. No. So here's the deal. I've told this different ways, and I've told it different ways since I've been here, and I've told it different ways on YouTube, so I want to tell it a slightly different way this time, but it all works together. My grandmother is the Pentecostal matriarch of our family, right? Beautiful. Matter of fact, Susan has been so gracious. She actually, everybody knows Susan. Where are you at, Susan? Wave your hand. Everybody knows Susan, of course, right? Susan has helped develop this tour, has put it all together, and I don't even know where I'm going to be tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday because I don't have to, because Susan's got it all under control, right? Well, today Susan got to hear me on the phone talking to my grandmother, checking on her, making sure everything was all right. My grandmother was not only the Pentecostal matriarch, she was the example of love. She was the embodiment of love. She fed everybody, accepted everybody, right? And so very early on, I just somehow made this erroneous assumption that her doctrine, which was our family doctrine, that it was as loving as she was, right? It wasn't. I didn't sit down and like do the math or nothing. I mean, it just happened. That was it, you know. And so she represented Jesus, and as awesome as she was, and as loving as she was, then Jesus must be even more awesome and more loving. And that must mean the doctrine and the Bible and church and church people, all of that has got to be just as awesome and loving as Mama is. And I was on the fringes of the situation until I got saved at Jimmy Swaggart's church and felt called to the ministry. And then it became my responsibility as a puppeteer, you know, as a pulpit-teer, right? Puppeteer. It's a lame joke, you know. It became my responsibility then to understand the doctrine. And the first stumbling block I ran into, 17, 18 years of age, and then had to work through for the next several years, was this thing about eternal punishment. Because if Mama was the creator of the universe, Mama would have dealt with the sin problem in a different way. Mama would not have somehow very foolishly created an eternal hell for the angels and then also made human beings of the same substance that there would be no choice but to put them there as well if they were not justified by the blood of Christ. And so I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get that all those people would go to hell and that all those people would go to hell for all the things that we said that they were going to hell for. And so I began to investigate hell. That was very, very early on. But it took years to, reverse engineer those thoughts and those doctrines. But once I began to see that the Bible did not, King James Version of the Bible even, did not really support the idea of hell the way that we were talking about hell, then it was like, well, what else does it not support? What else is different? And then eventually that led to, well, what about this Bible thing altogether? And then eventually that led to, well, what about the supernaturalism that the Bible promotes? And so it was one little bitty thing after another. You'll see I'm a preacher. I got 25-minute answers to 5-second questions.
I'm glad you said that you're kind of a sucker for not being able to say no. I hear what you're saying, and I can see that you are an awesome preacher and an awesome evangelist, and that you have an incredible talent there.
Thank you.
And I hear you talking about where you're coming from, but I don't hear you talking about where you're going to.
Right, because that's not why I'm here at the moment.
Well, I want to talk about that with you right now, because I want to invite you to be a preacher for the Church of Reality. I've got one. I want you to evangelize reality. I want you to win souls for Darwin. Yeah. And I think there's...
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shameless
Will I do it?
No, I want you to do this.
A much more brilliant man than me said I would never belong to, a club that would have me as a member, right? Anyway. No, I would consider it as far as joining, because obviously you and I support the same thing. We've talked a whole lot. We know each other very well. This is the first time that we've met in person, but we've communicated a fair amount over social media. So obviously I support what you're doing. I cannot tell you that I will join and forever be in this life a minister of reality, because I can't tell you that I will forever be a minister of anything. And that may sound a little disappointing, and It's something that we're preparing for. We have what the media likes to call an atheist church. We don't call it that by any means, but the media loves it. We have a secular congregation in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and I am the director of it, and I somewhat pastor it from California, right? You know, the best that I can with all the traveling that I do. But it's not our intentions for that to even stay the Jerry show. It's our intentions for us to raise up some leaders and for them to go on and do their thing. I've lived a life of complete and total self-sacrifice for 45 years. And so I can't even tell you, honestly, my gut reaction is this is probably the last tour like this that I'll ever do. Because it's time for me to develop, and I can't say for sure, but I'm open to that. So that's the only reason I don't make those kind of commitments, only because I don't know what the future holds. But what I am for is obviously humanism. If you know anything about my creed, then you'll know that I say that skepticism is my nature, free thought is my methodology, agnosticism is my conclusion, atheism is my opinion, but humanism is my motivation. And so that's what I'm for. I'm for lessening human suffering in every positive way possible. That's what I'm for.
Awesome.
Thank you. Darwin, oh, if I knew you could handle it, I'd preach. But you might not could handle it.
Hey, Jerry, I got a question for you. Looking back at the time you believed a God was real, would you say you were delusional
No.
at that point in time, or can you shed a little light on that?
I wish I could shed some light on it. You know, obviously there's some fantastic books out there, and there's a lot of great explanations of how the psyche works at that point. Maybe technically, you could use the word delusional. I think that's too strong of a word. I think it's too negative a word. I think it's an insulting word. I think when atheists call believers delusional, they're being egotistical, they're being superior, they're being self-righteous. You know, one of my favorite things, I was in Austin, Texas, not too long after this got started, and I'm telling my story, you know, and it took 25 years for me to, you know, understand. And somebody from the back shouted out, "You're a slow learner." And so my favorite thing after struggling, after paying the price, you know, I mean, it's twofold. It's a bitter pill to swallow after paying the price that our family has paid for me to come out and be honest, for then somebody to walk up and say, "I figured this crap out in the 4th grade." Well, that's awesome. And you suck, because since the 4th and a half grade, you should have been trying to get your ass over to me so I wouldn't suffer for the next 40 years. You know, and so there, you can see there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in those kind of things because it's complicated. I stagger at the mentality within a portion, not everybody, obviously, nobody in the room, obviously. It's never anybody in the room, right? I stagger at the idea that some people in the secular movement have, that every believer is just one YouTube video away from denouncing everything. And if you could just craft it just the right way, they'd all go, oh, I got it. It is so much more complex than that. Almost all believers, I would dare to say 99% of believers live 99% of their life as atheists. They put on seatbelts. They tremble when the plane takes off, right? They buy health insurance. They call the ambulance whenever their gallbladder ruptures. You know what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean that they don't believe in certain ways at certain times about certain things. It's so complicated. And the proof that it is complicated and that no one orator is going to get up in front of a group of people and solve the problems is that Robert Ingersoll is already dead and gone, right? I mean, that's how long these discussions have been being had. So to me, it's not something that is won if we're trying to win something, right? I don't like a lot of the battle terminologies, but it's not something that is going to be won primarily from just an intellectual basis. It's not even going to be one from just an emotional basis. Obviously, it's going to have to be a combination of all of those factors, and it's going to have to be one life at a time, because it's about life.
All right, we got one from Mitch.
In Brian's introduction, you said, or he said, you had been rejected by your community in many ways when you renounced your religious beliefs.
Yes, sir.
But your family, some of your family did, but I presume some of your family did not reject you. Perhaps, I'm interested in your grandmother or your nuclear family. How did that go for you?
That's an excellent question. So let's start on the very inside and work our way out. My wife felt like she had to leave. She actually moved to a different state because of everything that was going on. My son, who at the time when all this started was about 18, 19 years of age, he actually began to express his individuality about 2 years before I did. He wasn't saying the A word, and I don't think in our world he had a reason to yet think about those terms that way, right? Does it discourage you to know that I spent 25 years in the ministry and never once thought about atheist? Never once. It just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't. There were no non-believers. All right, people who had studied it and come to the conclusion they did not believe. There were no non-believers. There were just unbelievers. There was believers and unbelievers, and the unbeliever just hadn't heard the message the right way yet. That was it. That was it. David Silverman, I couldn't believe how he couldn't believe that I'd never heard of American Atheist the whole time that I, was in the ministry. It just was a non-issue. So when my son began to express his difference, it wasn't about there is or is not a God. It was about, is he or is he not going to ever get his hair cut again? Right? Is he really going to get that tattoo? Did he really get his ears pierced? Right? Is he really not going to come to church this morning? But he began to express it. So the very nuclear family, that describes that. My mother was for me like crazy right in the beginning. When everything was busting loose on Facebook and it was all going wrong and relatives were posting ugly things and people were unfriending and other people were friending so they could get in on it and see what was happening. That was the funnest thing. My mother was all for it because she thought that I was getting in trouble for just standing against religion again. Because I had been preaching against religion for years and years and years and years. And she just thought that some of our very conservative Pentecostal relatives were tired of me preaching against religion. And it wasn't until December of 2011 that she calls me up. And everything's already really, really bad, messed up. I've already gotten fired. She calls me up because she knows that I'm connected with this group called Recovering from Religion. Everybody know Recovering from Religion? She knows that I'm connected with that. It's part of what got me fired. And she says, your group is protesting a nativity scene in Texas. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. That's not what we do. But, people can do whatever they want to and print out whatever labels they want to print out. And I said, go look at that again. She said, hold on right now. So she got her. She said, oh, no, I'm sorry. It's not your group. With a big smile over the phone, you can see it. It's not your group. It's this thing called Foundation or Freedom from Religion Foundation. Then I knew we had a problem. And so I had to tell her, I said, look, Dan Barker, Annie Laura Gaylor, they're great friends of mine. Dan Barker connected me with the Clergy Project. I stand for everything that Freedom from Religion Foundation stands for, and that was a bad day. And so I lost her for a little bit, but she came back. My grandmother, which is the Pentecostal matriarch of the family, as I stated, there's just this very sad distance. We both hold our words. We're very careful because we know that if we get comfortable, all conversation in the last 3 years, this is the person that I was closest to on the entire planet. My wife would get jealous of the relationship that I had with my grandmother because there was nobody on the planet like Momo, right? And now for the last 3 years, it's been casual conversation. Anything more intimate than what's the weather like is running the risk of letting your guard down and accidentally saying something that leads to a conversation that will create more distance. And so that's, to me, the most tragic. My stepdad, he stayed cool. He's not crazy about everything that's going on, thinks I'm a little foolish for, saying the things I say and getting up in front of the groups I get in front of, especially since I'm only 5'5" and don't have any kind of reach on me. But he hung around. He stayed cool. Literally outside of that, uncle's family. My grandmother is one of 12. All the other 11 siblings that are still alive, and all of their children, and all those cousins and nephews and nieces and all that, all gone. I can think of one beautiful cousin named Dolly Wally, that she doodles all day. You know how many times she heard that in her life? That she's friendly via Facebook, but virtually all gone. All gone.
Yeah, you mentioned the clergy project. Could you tell us a little bit about your conversations with other members?
Sure. The conversations, whenever somebody joins the clergy project, obviously they're immediately relieved that they're not alone. Because I'm going to tell you the kind of thoughts you think. When you are 42 years old and you're pastoring a church that is doing well, and you've been appointed the mayor's chief of staff, and you're driving a city vehicle, and you've got an expense card, and you've got a nice office, across from the mayor's office, and you are making more money than you've ever made in your life because you started off life as an evangelist who was happy when it was $8 in the offering plate, right? And you start seeing that the things you're thinking are likely to tear all of that to pieces, then you have to ask yourself, is it me? Is this self-sabotage? Am I just crazy? Is there just something wrong with me? You ask yourself things like, and I know your answer to this, but just try to come with me back to where I was at. You ask yourself like, am I really smarter than Martin Luther? Right? Am I really able to read the Bible in a way with more clarity and more understanding than John Wesley, than John Calvin? Am I somehow more sincere than Martin Luther King Jr.? People who lived out of the Bible. Am I really that awesome? Am I that much more of a sincere human being than all these people? You ask yourself those things because the change is going to be phenomenal. And so when you get into the clergy project, and all of a sudden, as it is now, it wasn't then, but as it is now, there's 600 other people in this little secret group. You're like, whew, it's not just me. And so then you start asking things like, well, how did you tell your spouse? What did your spouse do? How did you tell your children? You've got members of the clergy project that their children are in seminary, are already missionaries on the other side of the world because they wanted to be like mama or daddy. You've got clergy project members that are fortunate enough that they belong to a church with good health insurance, and they've got a spouse that is bedridden and has a medication that costs thousands of dollars a month. That whenever they leave the church and they have to go to work at Walmart because their theological degree isn't going to get them diddly squat out in the real market, now their spouse is going to be in jeopardy with their health. You look in the mirror and you say, is my integrity worth my wife losing her dream home? Is my honesty, can I not figure out a way to, my pure honesty, being just really, really pure, can I not kind of dance and wiggle a little bit around this subject enough until my kids get out of college? Is my honesty, my integrity, is my conscience worth my kids losing college? So that generates the type of conversations that you have.
Pardon me. When you had reactions from believers and they would say things to you, what was the most annoying or the biggest canard that you found people would
I can tell you without even having to think about it. I just wish that you had met Jesus like I had. It'll make you want to try out your reach, I can tell you. depending on their doctrine, well, you obviously never did have the Holy Ghost. If they're Baptist, then, you never were saved. You never did believe. I mean, it was a setup from the beginning, because the Pentecostal denomination that I was raised in is very, very, very exclusive. And literally everybody but people who follow that exact doctrine are going to hell from that worldview. And even people in other Pentecostal churches are more than likely going to hell because they're not doing something right, or they'd be over here in our church. And then even the people on the pew with you don't know for sure if they're going to heaven or not, because they may be messing around in some stupid way, And so it's like that, I mean, I remember once I was dwelling on this as a very, very small child, and I was watching my grandmother's just sterling example, and I don't know what prompted me. I don't even remember now. It was so long ago, but I said to her, she was canning. Anybody do any canning? All right, mason jars, She was canning, and of course she's having to be very careful when she's pulling, that hot glass, out of the water. And it just occurred to me that she could drop on it any moment, because, you're dealing with this hot glass. And I said, Momo, just like that. I said, Momo, I said, if you were to drop that mason jar on the end of your toe, and it hurt so bad that you cussed, and then immediately had a heart attack and died, I didn't just tell the tall, dark, and handsome joke. What y'all laughing about? I said, would you still go to heaven? And she said, no, baby, I would not go to heaven, because that would mean that curse word was hidden in my heart the whole time. So we obviously thought Baptists were going to hell. All right? I mean, obviously we thought that. So anyway, I'll wrap it up. Go to the next step. Sorry.
So I want to ask you one, just because I'm up here. And
Sure, you got the right. You can do it.
It goes along with what you were just saying. So my mother is a Baptist minister. We go round and round every once in a while. Something I realized just last week when we were going back and forth, these facts and evidence really doesn't matter.
No.
For her, she had an experience when she was 7 years old, because you make your big decisions when you're 7.
Right.
And
right, that's right.
Yeah.
Make your best decisions.
Yeah, right, when you're 7.
Yeah.
But to her, it's such a real thing, and it's such a part of her that I don't think anything I say is going to make a difference. Do you get that feeling from your family as well?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And the only reason that I encourage people to continue on and do what you feel is best as trying to approach her and deal with her is because I would have felt that way if I was standing on the outside. I would have felt that way about me as well at some point. But it did change. I was that much of a believer, despite what they tell me. I was very much a believer. And but no, you're right. I think it's deeper and more complex than that. The YouTube videos, there's no doubt that it breaks people loose. And when I'm saying YouTube videos, I'm just talking about the whole thing in general of trying to debate. There's no doubt it breaks people loose. But I think more than anything, it confirms people's suspicions. It gives them an educated leverage to push that rock just a little bit further down that road because they were already heading that way. So, what I like to say is that nobody gets saved because they did the math and they think all those animals will fit on the ark. They just don't. They just don't. And so it is emotional.
Were you there?
Yeah, exactly. Were you there? Do you know? Did you see it? It was the babies. It was all babies. It was all baby animals.
Baby Tyrannosaurus.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to do 2 more, and then when we'll break, and then you can feel free to, attack Jerry. Really attack. But we'll do 2 more questions.
You said, as a Pentecostal minister, that you preached against religion.
Yes.
Can you explain that? That doesn't
Absolutely.
make sense to me.
And that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. And if anybody came here to talk about community building or something, please get with me afterwards and we'll work on that. That is a great question, and the reason I like that question so much is because it approaches the subject of the Pew Report that we've all passed around for the last couple of years. And the Pew Report got a lot of publicity where it said, it now leads to the headline, "The Rise of the Nons," right? Because the Pew report found that there was a lot of people who did not identify with any religion. I'm suspicious of those numbers after traveling across the country, only because I think a percentage of the nons on reports, on surveys, that they say they don't identify with any religion, because I'm not the only person who was preaching against religion. That is what people in modern Christianity all preach against. Nobody gets up in the First Baptist Church and says, we're pro-religion. They say, we're not a religion. We're not about religion. We're pro-relationship. We're not a religion. We have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And so that's the kind of things I was talking about. To us, and it's religious biased, right? But for us, Catholics were religious, because they had this hierarchy, they had this worship of the Pope, they had this worship of icons, and they were all very, very much directed by the institutionalized doctrine. That was a religion. But us free-willing Pentecostals and us independent Baptists, we didn't have a religion. We had a relationship, an independence. So it was really more about independence versus institution. But the language gets tricky when you're doing a survey.
My company is based in Houston, and so I travel there a fair bit, and they've even taken me up to cut and shoot.
Have they really? That's so awesome. See? Everybody thinks I'm making it up.
No, it's a real little town.
That's right.
And so I know there's a Houston Atheist group.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, how large is your congregation in Louisiana? I mean, the amount of people over there religious are much higher than here, it seems to me. So
sure.
Just, can you give an idea of the demographics of atheism and secularism?
Yeah, I can try to the best of my ability. The first thing that happened in our little part of Louisiana, in our part of the world, and this stretches out over several parishes, is someone a few years back started a Facebook page called the Lake Charles Freethinkers. Okay, that picked up a lot of steam. There are several hundred people that are connected to that Facebook, or members of that Facebook page. And so, I'm sure there's several hundred more. Probably for each person, there's at least another person who's yet to connect or doesn't feel like connecting, but is still, a non-believer. So you automatically have several hundred people that we know of from that way. Now, Community Mission Chapel, we're not very active on Facebook, but we've got a couple of hundred people, all right, that have connected with it and identify with it. When we have a service, when CNN came to film our service, we had about 80 folks. Now some of them were outside of the area, but they still identify with what we're doing. Then, but probably on regular services, we're thrilled whenever we have our normal 50-ish type folks. The Lake Charles Freethinker group feels pretty good when they've, if they have 30, they probably feel pretty good. But a lot of it has to do with age demographics, right? A lot of people who are getting a whole lot out of the Facebook page, it's going to be hard to put down the Xbox controller to actually drive over to the place where we're meeting. So I don't know if there's a good way to get a representative, but it's obviously pretty strong. It's obviously pretty strong. And here's the best part, because that was the last question, right? So I'll wrap it up with this, and I'll tie it back into your story added to everyone else's story becomes the story, which is actually the community. The better that you define that, the more effective you will be at community building. People want to know why they're here, and just like our bishop of reality back there was telling us, they also want to know where you're going, right? They want to know why you're here and where you're going. Well, what that all comes together for me is that in building community, this individualism, right, is extremely, extremely, extremely important. Your self-expression, your ability to step up and to be an individual then creates the community that we're all looking for. That's what's going on in Louisiana. That's what's going on in Houston. Houston has a fantastic atheist church with Oasis. Their brand is actually spreading, and now they've got churches in other states, right? And so it's going the right direction. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Jerry.
Good.